As I mentioned in a previous lecture, the English attack and the Yugoslav attack are the same setup for white, but you can use them against basically any of the Sicilian defenses, which is what makes having them a big part of your repertoire as white really important. And the great thing about it is you don't need to remember a whole bunch of different move orders and variations and everything, especially if you're playing a lot of blitz or rapid, which most of us are doing now on the internet. Then this opening is great. It's a powerful attack. You can get it going almost every time, no matter what your opponent does as black. And it just makes it so you save time on the clock, make a lot of strong moves, and don't have to think too much. But of course, we want to know what to do against it if we are black as well. I showed you guys how to defend against it in the dragon, and we want to do something similar in the Najdorf. And so remember that basically when you are under attack, I'm going to keep bringing up these same things so you guys remember during your games, you want to relieve the pressure and either defend, counterattack, or trade off pieces. Trading off pieces almost always benefits the defender because it relieves pressure and it relieves attackers. Now, of course, all of these things are generalizations and chess have to calculate to make sure that the trade that you're making will not hurt you or lead to some tactics. You have always to calculate. It just goes without saying, basically, at this point, that you always need to calculate between each and every move. But when you know the openings really well, when you know these lines, you have to calculate less, and you can make stronger moves more quickly, save time on the clock, and get a better position. So, same moves as before. We go into the Najdorf, and so they play F3 instead of H3. H3 is the Adams attack. F3 goes into the English attack. And so we're going to play the same D5 move, knock the knight back. The natural place for him to go is pretty much only B3. He can't go back to E2 anymore because they're not going to fianchetto the bishop like in the Adams attack and set it up that way. They're going to do just like we saw in the dragon variation. So we're going to castle like normal. They're going to set up their queen. Now, if they play queen D2 immediately, we play B5, and that stops this bishop from coming down to C4. That's a really good spot for the bishop in lots of these lines. Although once the knight is already on B3, it makes less sense for the bishop to go there. Usually the bishop want to go there earlier in one of the first few moves. And then that goes into the Fischer-Sozin attack, which we're also learning about in the course. And Fischer used that to great effect against the Najdorf himself. So we're going to look at that line as well. So playing B5 here, it just makes a lot of sense in a lot of these variations. It stops the bishop from coming down. It allows you to make this knight move if you need to, and it allows for expansion on the queen side. So this is what you want to see in the Najdorf. But notice, unlike the dragon, without the fianchettoed bishop here, everything is much more solid. It's harder to open up the king, and it takes more moves for the pawn storm to reach the king when you're playing the Najdorf. So it's easier to defend in the Najdorf than it is in the dragon, but you don't have as much of an aggressive response either because the dragon has that really good bishop aimed at the opponent's castled king, and it allows for those tactics that we saw in that lesson. And so here you can fianchetto your bishop, and they will start a pawn storm against you. And so we're going to keep developing. We're not going to worry too much about the pawn storm. We don't want to take time to move our pawns forward in front of our king. It takes away from our development, our counterattacking chances, and it also weakens the king. Almost always you want to keep the pawns flush unless for some reason you have to move a pawn forward if some tactics are about to happen where you're going to get checkmated to lose material, right? So you always have to calculate. But in general, we want to keep pawns in front of our king flush. It takes longer for the pawns to get there, and it allows us to make our moves. Maybe we'll put our queen here on C2 once again, opposite the opponent's king. If we can line up a rook and make a battery, and their opponent makes a mistake or later on fails to a tactic and has to move his queen, you can sometimes win this pawn and either get a checkmate, or if the king is moved, win a pawn with check, and it's just a threat that is hanging in the air that white has to always keep an eye on. Whenever we have these kinds of threats, we may not achieve winning a pawn or getting anything out of it that actually gains us material or checkmate, but the point of it most of the time is that it keeps your opponent's pieces from being more mobile. If he has to keep a piece here to defend his pawn, once I have a rook over here, then he can't be moving as many pieces over here. He can't move his queen over and attack. And so we always want to have threats hanging in the air. The threat of moving his pawn forward and knocking that knight off. The threat of him moving a piece and having the queen bear down on his king and have this pawn be pinned. Now maybe we can put a piece here or here, depending on what his pieces are doing, and his pawn is pinned. So again, in chess, we do things that have multiple purposes. This is also just a naturally good place for the queen. It's taking advantage of this semi-open file. It's mobile. It can move over here later on if white's pieces move. And if we are going to move this pawn forward, there's going to be some sort of trade in the center with these pawns, then the queen's in a little bit better position to defend and to move over to that side of the board as well. If he wants to move his knight down here and attack the queen, we can simply go ahead and just take it because he's forced to take it back with his pawn. And even though that pawn is in the center now, he's given us one of his attacking pieces and he's disrupted one of the pawns from his pawn storm. So it doesn't really help white to do that. It doesn't make any sense. If white wants to go ahead and do that, well, that's fine with us. We will simply line up across his king and then wait for him to move his pawns down and either defend or attack, depending on what chances he gives us. Notice that we can move these pawns forward as well. We both have attacking chances here. So that wouldn't favor white very much to do that. We're not afraid of making those kinds of trades. Again, remember that with black, you're trying to equalize the position. When you're playing the Sicilian, you're in a defensive position, although it's sort of an aggressive counter-attacking defensive position. And so trades like that will benefit you. White doesn't benefit a lot from making them. It doesn't really make much sense. White wants to use his moves to keep the attack going. And for example, if white can easily make a mistake in the attack too. If they go right here and they play g5 and they want to knock the knight back somewhere and keep their pawn going, well, in this case, knight can kind of block the attack, block the pawn storm, and put it right here. Yes, white can put his bishop here and look to threaten this knight, but the thing is, it's not a good idea. I mean, he might be able to win that way, but it allows the pawns to be blockaded or stopped, even if just temporarily, okay? And so you want to do anything you can to keep the position closed when you're defending. And your opponent wants to do anything they can to open the position against your king when they are attacking. And so a better move when you're in this situation, and you're going to see it a lot, is to simply play h5 first. And that way, later on, when you play g5, the knight can't go here, right? Because he can't take that pawn. It's defended, and now the threat is really serious because once he touches down one of these pawns with the king, we can ignore it, but he can capture it and start weakening our king and start bringing pieces over, and it starts to become dangerous. So we can look to do things like maybe put this knight here and push this pawn forward in the center and gain some space. We can knock this knight off, and we can trade off some pieces depending on exactly what is happening in the game. Now, if you move this knight, we pretty much have no choice but to put it here, here. Oftentimes, it can be a good thing to do to put a knight on e8 when you're defending, because you're defending one of the pawns in front of the king. And so when he comes down, if he wants to immediately come down and attack you, we don't want to take this. We don't want to open it up and allow his attack to come. Basically, we've got a couple things we can do here. We can put this pawn up on a6 and let him take here and just take back, which wouldn't be all that terrible. His bishop has no tactics coming down, but he has weakened our king, and he has allowed his queen to get lined up against. So starting to get a little bit more dangerous, but he doesn't have any kind of a decisive attack yet. We can simply ignore it and choose to maybe move his knight back out. And if he takes here now, we can take it with the knight. Either way, he's going to start having some chances. So be really, really careful. But we don't want to usually move our pawns forward before their pawns get down. It takes time. And we could choose to totally ignore that instead and just counterattack. We can just leave it as it is and look for some active play. It depends on how aggressive you want to be. I mean, maybe you threaten his queen and threaten to trade here. We'll probably trade this off. Now we traded off this piece, or we can even take back here the pawn and make him move this knight. He doesn't really have anywhere to go, so he has to go back. And notice now we're getting some momentum with our attack as well. So it's not just white that has the chances, it's both sides. We can choose if he does something like this to leave everything closed and just ignore it. Don't take back that pawn. A lot of times you want to just leave a pawn in front of your king. One of your opponent's pawns, and don't take it back. It closes a position. Whether or not that works will depend on the position you'll have to calculate. But in this case, notice it keeps it closed. There's no easy way for him to attack you. And if he wants to bring his pieces over now and attack this G7 pawn, that's one of the reasons why it's nice to have that knight. Now we have a knight defending this pawn, the only pawn that's vulnerable, and we have two pieces defending it. Now we can't move the rook over here because of this pawn, but we could take this with our king at a later time. We can move this bishop right here to F3, and he can't easily attack this piece. Meanwhile, we have some threats going ourselves. He can't move this knight. We can trade off the queen, or we can take this pawn if he moves the knight. And so it's just a really fun strategic game to play. And both sides are going to have chances, but black, you just need to know how to defend and know some of the typical things to do. Okay, so that's one example of how a English attack will play out. And white will usually benefit from being really patient. When you're attacking, you don't want to just barge through. To this point, white has been doing a lot of good things, but now this would be premature. Notice that we saw that you can defend against it. So don't be in a rush when you are in the attacking position. Set up your pieces so that your attack will be really effective when it finally does come. For example, this bishop hasn't been moved yet. So it makes sense to take this bishop out and put it either here on E2 to support the attack and allow the rook to swing over, although that blocks the queen. Or you can even just put it here on D3, and notice it's aiming at this H7 square, so if anything moves here later, it'll be in a good position and it doesn't block any of these pieces from coming over. So let's say, for example, you see something like this. Now white can move the rook over, and we're just going to be playing some normal chess. Maybe now we want to open up the center here, get some space. If he takes, now we're taking, and it's going to look really good. So white won't want to take right there, probably. Just keep swinging pieces over. Now he's got lots of pieces lined up on our king, starting to look really dangerous, but now maybe we can relieve some pressure, open the center up, look to have some of our own threats, and we're going to be playing some really fun chess. Okay, so the English attack is a great weapon for white. It's good in all of the Sicilian defense positions, but if you know how to defend against it for black, then the Najdorf is very playable. And as I said before, even though you might have less attacking chances than in the dragon, it's easier to defend the Najdorf than the dragon. And when you're playing blitz, the goal is to be able to make a lot of strong moves quickly so that you save time on the clock while also getting a good position at the same time.